Good evening, everybody, and welcome to another edition of Fire Up Michigan. Yes, Motown. I love wearing my Michigan hat because it's got the big M and it does stand for Michigan. I don't think a lot of you Spartan fans watching it may not like the hat, but I don't really care anyways. But M and the block stands for Michigan. And I love doing the Motown show. Then again, why wouldn't I? I was only born there anyways. But with that said, I want to welcome back our Motown crew, Madman Mancini, back for another round with us. Good evening, Mark.
Oh, I love this show. This is a show that's sweeping Motown, man. The Motown men.
That's it. And George Eichorn, my colleague forever. Welcome back, George.
Good to be here. Thanks.
All right. Well, we got, just to give everybody an overview of what we're talking about, two subjects. I can count it with my hands. 1, 2. We're talking Detroit Pistons, and we are talking Detroit Grand Prix. And George will have the opportunity to cover the Detroit Grand Prix. We'll get into that shortly. So let's talk about, George, the Detroit Pistons lottery history, which I view as an adventurous one. Okay. But when you talk about the Pistons lottery, you can only think of the one thing that probably cost Joe Dumars another executive job. And that was when he picked Darko Milicic in 2003 over Carmelo Anthony. My goodness.
It was unbelievable, Scott and Mark, picking Darko, who's a big man, obviously from a foreign country, Serbia, and the Pistons thought they needed a center, and obviously after LeBron James was taken number one, obviously a no-brainer there by the Cavaliers, Pistons went out and picked Darko and passed up, like you said, Carmelo Anthony. The next three, in fact, guys, Carmelo Anthony, Chris Bosh, and Dwayne Wade. Okay, come on. I mean, any one of those three obviously would have been a hell of a lot better than Darko Milicic. There's no way that the Pistons should have wasted. And you're right, Scott and Mark. That was his Achilles heel, Dumars. He was a good general manager here, though. He did get one championship, as you guys know, and the Pistons, during the time he was GM, but he was not that astute as far as draft choices go. I agree.
Yeah, the one thing I should point out, Mark, before you get involved here is the fact that Carmelo Anthony has to be licking his chops knowing that Darko Milicic got the championship ring and Carmelo Anthony doesn't have one. Boy, and I've heard that pick set the franchise back a lot of years. All right, Mark, go ahead.
Well, I mean, this is right up there. It's not as big as Sam Bowie being drafted by the Portland Trailblazers, but at number 2 pick and dropping Michael Jordan in there, number 3, where the Bulls came swooping in. But yeah, the Pistons, I just don't think they did their homework on that one. Right. I look at organizations, and when I look at the Pistons organization, they might want to take that slogan the Tigers were given, "Bless the boys." And the Pistons, I think, even after they beat the Lakers in '89 and took them out, we saw what they did later on. I mean, they held on to guys a little too long there. We saw the Ben Wallaces hang on, the Rick Hamiltons. But the Pistons draft picks have been something. And we just saw this past year what the pick was coming behind Houston. So I don't know. I mean, the state of the NBA, guys, in my mind, really is a far cry from what I've watched in the 70s, the 80s, and the 90s. I see, Devin Booker sitting there after a blowout loss to the Dallas Mavericks and more or less saying, to everybody in TV land that, our family sacrificed a lot, during the season. So now we got to pay our dues back, take care of our family. We'll see you next year. This is not the kind of talk I want to see by a Devin Booker or a Chris Paul. I need to see, guys that ran through walls, the Pete Maraviches, the Karl Malones, these kind of guys, even the bad boys of the Pistons. The NBA needs to be really looked at these days. It's hard to find teams that had rivalries. Only the Warriors and the Heat in the last few years have been consistent with building, strong teams compared to the Celtics, Lakers, Sixers, and Pistons.
Well, amazingly enough, Mark, and I want to just stay on course with the draft for a moment, but I also want to reiterate, though, on Wednesday night on the Sports Exchange, and I actually had a broadcast called the NDL, the National Drama League, short, AKA NBA. And I can tell you right now, I don't have a lot of lengthy shows, but I had a panel of 5 people for that. That lasted almost an hour and a half. But I also, in that particular episode, though, talked about 13 players, the good ones and the bad ones. I'm going to tell you, you can only imagine if you have a chance to listen to that show, it'll certainly reinforce a lot of what you say. And since this is a Michigan-based broadcast anyhow, well, it would behoove us to say that Magic Johnson saved the NBA along with Larry Bird. So there is a Detroit connection. But staying with the Pistons for a moment, okay, in the draft situation, Darko Milicic, to me, probably had good tape. But I'll go back to what you said, Mark, okay? They didn't do their homework. There are a lot of great European players that do come over that are exceptional players. Unfortunately, but the biggest question I'm going to ask both of you guys is, do you take need or you take the best athlete? Because at that time, the Detroit Pistons felt that they wanted to take need. That's why you go with the 7-footer Darko Milicic versus the obvious choice, Carmelo Anthony, who, when he did come out of Syracuse, was a freshman that won a title and carried the Orange to the championship as well. So again, I think you would have had multiple titles, George, with Carmelo, and I was excited that they were going to get him. But then again, they didn't. Okay,
Yeah.
and yet Darko gets the title and Carmelo is waiting. So, George, let's go back to that 2003 draft a little bit. And what do you think the mindset was of the Pistons when they made that choice? Because obviously you saw the players that followed thereafter.
Yeah, yeah. Well, you got to go back to the bad boy eras, and they had James Buddha Edwards as a center, and then John Sally was up front, and then things kind of tailed off after that. The Pistons have not had, let's face it, since and our dear friend just passed away, Bob Lanier. I mean, you talk about a great draft choice when he came out of St. Bonaventure, but you look back in Pistons history, guys, as far as getting a center and a big man. And I can understand. I'll grant you that they didn't maybe do the homework, but you're right, Scott. In that position, they were looking for the position. They have had difficulties getting centers. I don't know why to stay in Detroit. Like I said, even they rented Buddha Edwards. I mean, he wasn't homegrown. And then, of course, they lucked out with Ben Wallace, who turned into be a premier center, not even a natural center to some people. And he wasn't 7 foot or anything like that, but boy, what a hell of a rebounder. So for that championship set of in years when they were contending, Wallace was fine. But for some reason, the Pistons have not been successful at center. So I guess that's why Dumars went for it. But I kind of agree with you. I think you should go for the best athlete when you're that high up, and there are cases made for both of those, best athlete versus need. But in this case, I'm thinking that, they wanted that center. They needed a center really bad, but not the best choice.
Yeah, but also I should point out, Mark, and then I'm going to turn it over to you in a moment here. William Bedford was a mitigating disaster, and he talked about a guy that had the physical tools and the ability. I remember when he played college ball, he was awfully good. But then again, the skills did not translate into the NBA. So, like anything else, okay, the Lions have tried so hard to get running backs that didn't work out with except a few here and there. And I'm not talking much Lions. And the Pistons have had the same parallel that it took place here with the centers. And let's not lose sight of the fact the Milwaukee Bucks, they've traded away some good picks. And we're not even going to get into that because that's another topic for another night. But Chris Middleton worked out well for obviously the Milwaukee Bucks. Okay, Mark, obviously, we've given you a lot to bite on here and you're patiently waiting. So where do you want to go with that?
Well, I look at, growing up, the Pistons with Bob Lanier and Dave Bing. I mean, and then we got into the bad boys and everything. But, I think the Pistons downhill effect is transpired. When they got Blake Griffin to team up with Andre Drummond there, it was nice when Griffin came over, but I just didn't think he fit the city. I know he was an Oklahoma kid, and he revitalized the Clippers out here with Paul and DeAndre Jordan and stuff. But when he went to Detroit, it just seemed like he was, a deer in headlights there. After the injuries started to mount. But tell me, guys, the last time I think the Pistons have been relevant, it's got to have been a decade ago, if not longer.
And let me point out a couple of things. Andre Drummond was a good pick, and Greg Monroe was a good pick. I think the problem with Greg Monroe, whether it was too much losing or his head got big and he thought he could do well, because where's Greg Monroe been since? All over the NBA. So again, I'm with you all the way that when you talk about draft, it is a hit and miss. Remember, though, when I put the word draft into place, they're called prospects. Okay.
Right.
Just
right.
remember, they're prospects. They're not guaranteed blue chippers, and they take time to develop. Some develop a little quicker than others, some don't, which enables me to segue to a guy, by the way, named Cade Cunningham, who the Pistons finally got right in the NBA draft lottery. And let me go over some updated news that just came across before we came on here, that Detroit Pistons guard Cade Cunningham was named to the 2021-2022 Kia NBA All-Rookie team. And this guy here goes ahead and averages 17.4 points, 5.5 rebounds, 5.6 assists, and 1.2 steals a game in 36 minutes over 64 games. He wanted to play there number one, which is great. And this kid here, and to Troy Weaver's credit and Dwayne Casey, they inherited the mess at Stan Van Gundy. When you ship away draft capital to save your job and you bring on Blake Griffin, they inherited. That wasn't their fault. So they've drafted much better in the last couple of years, but we won't get into that. So let's talk about, George. You're there in Motown. Cade Cunningham, I think, to me, the kid wears number 2, which is Chuck Daly, the number that Chuck Daly had retired. So they obviously had to think of enough of them to let that number be in circulation in this game.
Yeah, he's really adapted well. The town really loves him. Obviously, the Pistons are attracting a new, younger audience. Downtown Detroit, there's a huge population of young urban professional type of people that have relocated back to Detroit, back to the downtown area after the Pistons, as you guys know, left the suburbs, which was the Palace in Auburn Hills. So they need identity. The Pistons are lacking identity. They got it now with Cade Cunningham. He's been involved with commercials and sponsors of a few things, not a whole lot. You're right, Scott. I mean, he played 64 games, and obviously he didn't get the Rookie of the Year award, and probably because he missed about 18 games or whatever that amounts to. But he is the real deal, I think. He showed a good amount of savvy on the court. The only problem he had this year, he racked up a lot of fouls. He made some fouls that probably should not have been made, but he's only a rookie. Okay. Cut him some slack. Okay. So he got in foul trouble quite a few times during the games, but as far as identity goes, oh yeah. I mean, the fans here in Detroit love it.
Mark, Cade Cunningham, he's a player. What do you know about him?
Well, he is a player, and the thing is, you got to see consistency more and more. So let's hope they talked about Devin Booker being a leader and everything, and we saw how far that went. And now, they've fallen from grace. But the thing, when you brought it up earlier, George, with the Palace of Auburn Hills there, I know I kind of liked it. I remember Cobo Hall, where the Pistons, used to play and everything. But this is the problem when you take these arenas and put them in the suburbs, they lose that value as far as attendance. We're seeing that in Phoenix, and I don't want to switch subjects, but, Scott, you lived in Phoenix. The Coyotes moved out of downtown, went 40 miles out to, Glendale, and now they couldn't draw flies. So now they're, relocating back to ASU till a new arena gets built. How important is that? Even if you have the superstars, who's driving all the way to the suburbs if you got all the businessmen and everything staying downtown in hotels and stuff within walking distance?
Yeah, I'll give you some good advice, Mark. Okay, you ready? Yeah. Don't get me started with the Phoenix Coyotes and Arizona Coyotes, and I'll tell you why. And I can't wait to get on your Phoenix show if it ever when the time comes, because George knows this all too well. When I lived there a couple of years ago, I mean back in early 2000, I wrote a story that the PR guy did not like, and that they shouldn't have played downtown over at the America West Arena, because one of the goals was actually you couldn't see it; it was obstructed view. And I told them that if they had any sense at all, and again, I didn't score points. I only went to 2 Coyote games. And mind you, this is an organization that Gretzky couldn't save. They should have moved it to the Arizona Memorial Coliseum and went through with their original plan to go to Scottsdale. Now, with that said, okay, I used to love the Palace of Auburn Hills. To me, that was my home away from home. I went to 40 to 50 games a year. I did. And you know what? Maybe it's funny. Here I am going on an Oakland show every Saturday with you. And this show's in Oakland County, Michigan. Okay. I've lived my whole time in Farmington Hills and all the Novi and you name it. I'm an Oakland County guy. Don't get me wrong. I crossed
I got
over.
a friend that lives in Novi.
What's that? Oh, do you really?
Yeah.
Yes. But you know, I would go to Tiger games in Wayne County once in a while. I would go to Red Wings here and there, but George and I, you know, we went back and forth because we had to for the Detroit Monitor. But most of my time was spent, believe it or not, at the Silverdome and the Palace of Auburn Hills. But when you get me started about suburbs, you know, Glendale was a joke. I mean, obviously, I think I went to the arena. It's a beautiful arena. There's nothing wrong with the arena. I think the Coyotes are a franchise or a laughing stock. And I'm not trying to get off subject a little. I'm only talking in terms of a location between suburb
Well,
and
can I ask you something? Did that kill the Lions playing in Pontiac?
No, and I'll tell you why.
No.
And here's the deal. If the city of Pontiac had any sense at all, they would have renegotiated the Lions lease and they wanted to stay there. They really did. You know, the Fords don't hold people hostage at all to move a team if they don't have to. But when Pontiac overplayed their hand, the Fords were left with no choice, and then the opportunity to go downtown took place. We know what happened there. So I love, to me, the Pontiac Silverdome was another one of my favorite homes on Sundays at night, you name it. I loved it there. I spent 8 to 10, 12 hours a day out there on game day because George will tell you what an intense preparer I was for games. I go to the draft and whatnot. But
yeah.
But
you know, the thing is that, you know, Tom Gores made the decision to move that team from Auburn Hills to Detroit. There's a lot of pressure on Tom because of the turnaround of Detroit. And don't forget Dan Gilbert, who we know owns the Cavaliers. He's got a huge stake in downtown Detroit and the turnaround of Detroit. So we don't know for sure, but I'm sure there must have been some conversations, I would guess, between Tom Gores and Gilbert. And the decision to leave was a huge decision, Auburn Hills, but go back to the downtown environment, I think was important for Detroit. They had to, like you guys said, they had to re-identify themselves with the Detroit audience because so many of them wouldn't even go out to Pontiac or Auburn Hills. They're kind of in the same area. For those of you that aren't familiar with Auburn Hills, it's right past Pontiac. So the Lions were in Pontiac, Pistons were in Auburn Hills, and then you had the Red Wings downtown and the Tigers downtown for those that forgot about Detroit's history of arenas. But that being said, I'm not going to dispute the fact that Little Caesars Arena is a humongous, beautiful arena. It's got all the bells and whistles. And I know some people aren't happy with their seats and the location, and some seats are very high up. But so far, you know, it's worked out okay. The fact is they don't have winning teams, though.
Let me point out
Pistons or the Red Wings.
Let me point out one other thing. I don't know why I'm going back on this thing here, but when George and I covered a Red Wings game at Joe Louis Arena, George had a chance to meet this guy's assistant. And remember what he told you, that he thought the PR guy was a little bit, you know, how in your eyes, what was his description? That he overreacted a little bit because
a little bit too sensitive, overreacted to Scott's criticism, and your criticism was valid. And, you know, he even agreed, the guy from, I believe, the Mighty Ducks.
Yeah, exactly.
He did PR for the Ducks at that time. Mighty.
Well, here's the thing, guys, and being a Pittsburgh boy, Pittsburgh got it years ago by tearing down Three Rivers Stadium and creating PNC Park, one of the most beautiful parks in baseball. I could be a little biased here. And then you had Heinz Field. Cleveland followed with, you know, building the Jake and the Q and all that. It just seemed like that 10-block radius in Detroit was all like a war zone, and the banks, you know, came in there and kind of cleaned it up. And now you have something where not many cities, if you might be the only city where you have all the venues like right there for each and every one of the sports teams. So
yeah,
it's you know, I think years ago, you know, Detroit was like on the surface trying to find the on-ramp. Not a negative remark, but I think Pittsburgh and Cleveland were in the fast lane of the freeway. Is that could you agree with that?
Well, yeah, and let me take it another step further, Mark. You're really on target here. So right now the Pistons, I cover Inter Miami here in Florida. Okay, and here's the thing. Okay, when the MLS wanted them to take that old jail site and turn it, why do that? Because you had Ford Field and already there, and you've got the Atlanta, Seattle franchises playing in an existing football stadium. They can easily have moved that team to Ford Field and made it look nice. And I saw the Atlanta situation when I covered the Jaguars. So, no, I guess it makes sense to have all the teams within a half a mile from each other. And I've been to Little Caesar Suites, unbelievable place. I love the place. I'm just more of a suburb guy than anything else, but I understand the decision. Of course, now the Pistons have moved their entire headquarters down there, and they have Cade Cunningham as a guy that they need to really go ahead and market and reinvigorate that downtown area. Yeah. And he is a cornerstone. So what that said is we stay back on track with the Pistons, George. They were supposed to pick third, or they were hoping to pick third, but they slid to number 5. So with that said, I know Sadiq Bey is one of the hotter prospects there. Name a couple of other ones since you're closer to the team. I know he's a guy that stands out. Of course, we know Cunningham.
The big question is about Grant. Is Grant going to stick around or not, or is he going to want to be traded? He's their leading scorer, and that's a whole big issue right now, whether they're going to be able to retain him or not. I think the foundation is coming together. I mean, Troy's done a nice job. Dwayne is a winning coach. I think Gores has deep pockets. So I look for them to make some good moves and sign some free agents this year. I'm not totally convinced that whoever they get at 5 is going to step right in. He's not going to be like Cade Cunningham could just step right in. That being said, with Sadiq, you mentioned Sadiq Bey. The kid had a great season, just a great season. So I think a lot of the pieces are starting to come together, but obviously it takes a lot more than what they performed this year. Of course, again, missing the playoffs. So it's going to be a long struggle, but they're at least the building blocks, I believe, are there. They got the right tools. Ed Stefanski, we can't say enough about a veteran man like Ed Stefanski in the front office too, who's kind of like, Gore's right-hand man. And he doesn't get in the way of Troy, but, Ed Stefanski is there. And Arn Tellem. And don't forget about Arn. Arn does a great job with the community. He was very instrumental in driving that move back to downtown Detroit. Arn Tellem and former, as you guys know, agent for the players. So I like the hierarchy, okay? I like the front office. I like the coaching staff. And now it's just going to be a matter of getting guys that can. But they got room. They got room in the cap and everything. They should make some offseason moves.
Well, I'm sorry, Mark. Last year in the draft, they went ahead and brought in Isaiah Livers and Rudy Garza in the second round. And what I liked about those 2 picks is they were proven Big Ten guys. So, that's part of the foundation Troy Weaver has had no problem building as he did in Oklahoma City. Go ahead, Mark.
Well, the problem with these days is a draft pick. If there's not a clear-cut number 1 or 2 or 3, then you got 15 guys where you got to flip a coin to hope you got the best pick there. This is not like where you got the LeBron Jameses and Orlando's got the number 1 pick, where you got the Shaqs, or a Larry Bird came in Magic and they saved the NBA from the tape delays at 11:30 at night. So you're going to need about 2-3 of these Cunninghams to save your team and to get past the 20-30 win mark here. That's the problem. And the big problem here is in the East. The East now is overtaking the West as far as teams. You're going to compete with the Miamis, Philly, Brooklyn,
Boston,
Milwaukee, and this is the thing. So until Detroit starts to load up with, number 1s, number 2s, and number 3s, it could take close to 5-6 years to build something there. Then you're just going to be treading water. And call me if I'm right on this or wrong.
Well, here's the thing. I do believe they have the right coach, George. I've never met him. Dwayne Casey seems to be the right guy for the job. Yes. I enjoyed, when I covered the Pistons full time, working with Doug Collins and Chuck Daly. Those and Rick Carlisle. Those are three of my favorite coaches that I had a good relationship with. So,
Well,
you're right, Mark. Being a Pittsburgh guy, that sometimes it takes a little bit longer to build teams. I'm not picking on the Pirates by any means. But the Penguins were never, until Mario Lemieux got there, they weren't relevant. In fact, they were practically broke. And I like the fact that you brought up tape delay, because you know what? There's only the three guys on this show here tonight are old enough to remember how bad things were during the tape delay era, by all means. But I think when you, George and Mark, when you put the Pistons in perspective, George, I'm going to ask you, since you're there, how many years do you think the Pistons are away before they see the playoffs?
Well, I think they're probably still a couple more years away from the playoffs. Mark, you hit on a great point. The East is a beast right now, as we can see. And, the battles between teams like Miami and Boston and Milwaukee. And, it's going to take it could take another couple of years to get to the playoffs. But that being said, you need to get everything right. You need to have guys that are fitting in. You need to have the right role players. I mean, there's so much involved. Yes, you can turn around an NBA team, but it's not very easy, as we've seen some of these clubs that are spending huge money, such as the Brooklyn Nets and clubs like that. And then where do they end up? Out of the playoffs already. So, I mean, there's teams that just spend. That's not what they want to do in Detroit. It's not a matter of spending and writing a check. They want the right players here. And like you said, Scott, it's not going to happen overnight. And Mark, it could take another couple of years before they make the playoffs.
All right. So with that said, George, okay, I'm going to go back to the number 5 picks. I want to give the Detroit Grand Prix a little bit of time too. Okay, would you have any idea whether it's a position or what they need with that number 5 pick? You know what? And Mark, you made an outstanding point. There is no clear-cut number 1 pick, and there hasn't been the last couple of years. So you are dead on, Mark, with that. But with that said, since George is in Motown, with the number 5 pick, I'm the one putting you on the spot. Okay.
Yeah,
where do you think the Pistons are going to go with the 5th pick?
There's all kinds of speculation. Garza, of course, Luke Garza on the team. He wants his teammate in. Would rather have his teammate from was it Iowa or Purdue?
Iowa,
yeah. So he's been mentioned. The other 5, 6, 7 people, are kids. Okay, they're kids coming from good programs like a Duke or North Carolina. We know what happens all the time. These kids come in after 1 or 2 years. They're not ready for the NBA yet. Now, Cade was special. Cade, it looks like he's special, and he could produce right away. But a lot of these other kids, like Mark was alluding to, it's not a deep, in that sense, it's not a deep draft of real good players. But to get around and answer your question, I don't know. They need so much help. I think they're still going to go with the best athlete available, that kind of approach. And I don't know who that would be right now. But that being said, that should help the ball club. Maybe not right away, but he won't be in the lineup like Cade as a starter, I doubt. But you never know.
So I guess when you look at the Pistons, as we put a button on that before we go to the Detroit Grand Prix, Darko, we know what that was. They didn't work out very good. Cade Cunningham, I think, is one of the best picks that they've had in a while, and they got lucky. And we'll readdress this there later on in June about who the number 5 pick, and then we'll hopefully have more information there. Okay, obviously, Mark, you're familiar with Grand Prix racing on the West Coast with the Long Beach Grand Prix. One of the bigger traditions in Metro Detroit is the Detroit Grand Prix. But before I get to the Detroit Grand Prix, George and I used to cover a lot of auto racing over at the Michigan International Speedway, and I loved MIS. To me, that was unbelievable. But staying on point, okay, George, you're covering the race, so I believe from June 3rd to the 5th. I believe this is the last time that they're having that race on Belle Isle. Is that correct?
That's correct, Scott. And it's going to be kind of bittersweet because the island is a great place for the race. I mean, it to me, I just feel like it's like, I don't mean to be schmoozy here, but like paradise. I mean, you're racing on an island. Yeah, you're taking a bridge to get over there or a boat if you're lucky to own one. But the people were just so fed up with the distraction and the time it takes to set the track up and to tear it down. And Roger Penske and his team, Bud Denker and the folks that run the race, I think they were a little bit frustrated and fed up with the complaints they got too from the conservationists environmentalists and people that kind of run the island. Some people don't know this, but state of Michigan now owns the island. It was part of the Detroit bankruptcy. The state of Michigan runs it as a park, a state park. So the mix was not good. But that being said, I love the island setting, but I also loved the downtown Detroit setting, which we had the F1 race for several years before we had something called CART, C-A-R-T. As you guys know, championship auto racing teams used to be called CART, the Indy cars. So there is a background of racing downtown Detroit. But that being said, like, it's going to be a lot of fun though. But you're right, it's going to be bittersweet to have one more run on Belle Isle come a week from this, or 2 weeks from Saturday.
Well, I've had the opportunity to cover a few races with you. I enjoy going on the island. You and I used to go there all the time. We used to run all over the track. So by all means, it was an awful lot of fun in Belle Isle. I never saw anything on the streets. I've never really done a lot of street stuff. And we just had one in Miami with the Formula One Miami Grand Prix. Well, and that thing was a smashing success. I didn't get there, obviously, because I've been busy with my Marlins responsibilities in Inter Miami. So anyways, George, what kind of a financial impact do you think that Detroit gains with the Detroit Grand Prix year in and year out? Because we all know, okay, what kind of exposure it gets. In Detroit right now, obviously the downtown area has obviously been revitalized. This has got to be a big boom here, knowing it's going to be downtown. And we know, let's face it, Mark, okay, anything that Roger Penske puts his hands on is gold, because the man owns the Indianapolis Motor Speedway.
Well, you know, I don't know if you believe all those things. I mean, you hear tens of millions of dollars and this and that for the city. You know, I don't know. I never really put a whole lot of stock in those figures because they're hard to prove. One thing I do know is that because the race is on Belle Isle doesn't mean that they're sleeping on Belle Isle, they're eating on Belle Isle. No, a lot of people were already going back downtown Detroit to get their car, for example. There was our huge conference center called Huntington Place, used to be called Cobo Center, our convention center. People park cars there. We have the Renaissance Center where they park their cars. So even though the race was on the island, there was still a lot of activity and money coming back to bar owners and restaurant owners in downtown Detroit. That'll get doubled and tripled starting next year when they actually have the circuit back downtown Detroit instead of Belle Isle. But the economic impact is huge. And I'm glad you brought up Roger Penske, because that man, the city owns a lot of debt to that man. He has put his name out and his money out, just like Dan Gilbert, Mike Ilitch, and Bill Ford and others. But, you know, one thing about Penske is that he has a passion for this sport. He has teams in NASCAR, as you guys know, and IndyCar and other race circuits. So Roger has a passion for auto racing, and you know, it shows, because he wants to see the city turn around. In fact, getting off subject real quick, he was the one almost single-handedly that got Detroit the Super Bowl at Ford Field. And before that, of course, it was once at the Pontiac Silverdome. Roger had a lot to do with that. But I'd be interested in knowing, Mark, how did the race in Long Beach, how does that go over? That's been a staple on the calendar for a long, long time.
Funny you bring that up. I went, and it reminds me, and I haven't been to New Orleans, but it reminds me of a Mardi Gras setting. They just shut the whole city down. They leave the track up. They don't take the track down now. So they leave the track up year round. And we sat in the hangar, and I got something that, you know, I think it's a collector's thing. As far part of the rubber, when you sit in the hangar, they slow down around there to speed it back up and go down the stretch. Caught a piece of the rubber flying. So yeah, unbelievable race. They tear up the streets and everything, but man, it was a close race till the end too.
Well, the amazing part about these Grand Prix is we talk about the economic impact of them, but nobody's going to sit here and tell me that the exposure you get on national television is even more priceless. You can't even put a monetary value. Yeah. I mean, the thing, and Detroit, believe it or not, and I'm not picking on my hometown. I'm proud to be born and raised there, but they could use a lot of positive publicity with the way they've renovated and remodel that area. I mean, Dan Gilbert's put a lot of money. You talked about George, and Roger Penske is Detroit. Okay. And I'll tell you guys an interesting story. when I was playing Little League Baseball in Southfield, Michigan, Roger Penske had a Chevrolet dealership and was sponsoring one of the teams that I participated in. So you want to talk about giving back. Yeah, in fact, and you know what? When I covered auto racing on a regular basis, he was very approachable, and I talked to him from time to time, and I'm hoping to at some point get back in it again down here in Miami, but time will tell whether I do. But I'm working on some things that I'll let you guys know about later on down the road. But yeah, Roger Penske, Mark, okay, to me is Detroit, because like George mentioned, no, you didn't get off subject. I'm glad you brought the fact that he had a very instrumental role in getting the Super Bowl to Detroit there. It's just, to me, whatever Roger Penske puts his hands on, to me, is gold, because he's not afraid to invest his money to make things right. And, George and I, Mark, whether you know it or not, when, as you continue to get to work with us, we've done so much together between the two of us. We've covered 6 Super Bowls. I've been to 4. He's been to 2. And not only that, we went to an Indianapolis 500 together. Yeah. And you don't have enough time between your 9 million broadcasts and shows here to get on them all. So we have to space them out a little bit from show to show so you can absorb it a little bit. But George and I went to an Indianapolis 500, and I've been to 2. And, our Super Bowls. And we know how far Detroit's come from the suburbs to downtown. And I tell you right now, I'm glad when I have been downtown recently. It's certainly definitely gotten a facelift, and I'm sure there's a lot more things. George, while we're talking about downtown for a moment, though,
sure.
We know that Joe Louis Arena was torn down. And so what are they going to do with the Joe Louis Arena site? Have you heard any early things? Because I'm really curious.
Yeah, they're going to be building more housing. They're going to be putting up 1 or 2 towers for permanent housing, condos. And it's to me, it's not the best thing, but it's what Detroit wants. What Detroit needs is more available and housing for a lot of the younger people that want to live downtown. So that's what they're going to do on the Joe Louis Arena site, is they're building apartments and condos.
Yeah, and I'll tell you what, I've seen it in Tampa, though, Mark, when the Tampa Tribune was torn down and they ended up building condominiums along the Tampa River. Let me tell you, anytime you go ahead and put condominiums and apartments on the river, you know what? You're talking some of this, and that's what they're going to get top dollar for those. And I wouldn't be surprised with that prime real estate where Joe Louis Arena was, that we had a lot of incredible memories. In fact, Mark, George, and I go back so far that we've seen games at the old Olympia Stadium. That's a history.
Yeah, I remember that.
So,
and I also wanted to mention, Scott and Mark, that the land right behind Little Caesars, Joe Louis Arena used to be at, on the waterfront, is going to be the Ralph Wilson. Ralph Wilson, the late owner of the Buffalo Bills, a longtime Detroit resident and Grosse Pointe. Ralph left a bundle of money to build a huge park. So that huge park is going to be along the waterfront, which would be just west of where Joe Louis Arena was. So it's going to be really beautiful there once this is all done. But no, the city is turning around. I agree with you, Scott. That's a very good point you made. And of course, Mark knows this too. Anytime you can get NBC, ABC, ESPN, whoever to cover your race, to cover your downtown and show those beautiful shots from the helicopter, from the blimp or whatever. I mean, it's priceless, like you said. I mean, it's a Chamber of Commerce moment, for Detroit or Long Beach or whoever it is.
Well, and not only to put a finishing touch on that, guys, I don't know how serious it is, and I haven't heard the latest, but there's been talk Buffalo maybe moving out of there and going to like San Antonio or something. It's funny with Ralph Wilson, having all that money and buying up that land. You could have 2 NFL teams in Detroit.
Well, you'd want to think that. I should point out, though, now that you've got the NFL and that the Detroit will be hosting the NFL draft soon as well. A couple things, folks. This is Fire Up Michigan. My name is Scott Morgan of Motor City Madmouth. Not that you couldn't figure that out with the Motor City reference. Anyways, okay, which is appropriately fitting. George Eichorn, my longtime co-host, and Madman Mancini, my latest partner in crime. Fire Up Michigan can be heard on iHeartRadio, and obviously subscribe to the South Florida Tribune YouTube channel. So as we put a button on this broadcast here tonight, Mark, okay, what do you want to get out of the Detroit Pistons and the Detroit Grand Prix? in terms of what you've learned? Because I know one thing, Mark, when you come on these shows with George and I, you're always going to learn a lot about the latest market that you're in. And we try to make sure we do different things everywhere so we can give you a much quicker speed course here to learn about Metro Detroit, which I think, not being partial or nothing, one of the best sports towns in the country, because I know that they're very loyal. But Mark, this is on you. What do you want to get out of tonight's information between the
Well, I
Pistons?
learn a lot from both you guys, and it's nice. And I try to follow up and get in the trenches of Detroit Metro sports and everything. But the race, hopefully, it'll be up there like the Long Beach Grand Prix. It was very exciting this year. Talked to a lot of people, and they say it was one of the best races. It went to the end. There was no clear-cut favorite, till the last few laps. But that's what I'd like to see Detroit get. And as far as the Pistons, just start progressing. Don't regress, because, you don't want to be like the Orlando Magic that's been, having these teams ever since Shaq. They're still trying to find themselves. And, they've had good ownership down there, and the DeVos and Pat Williams and everything. Just seems like they can't get over the hump. So, let's not take 2 decades to get a team back to, where the promised land. Let's start building, get the playoffs, get in the 8th seed, and start moving it up the ladder, and get to the Pistons like we saw in the old days where they battled Chicago and Boston and got past those teams, past the hump.
Yeah, I got to tell you, I'm really proud of my days, George, when we covered the Pistons. Bill Wickett went ahead and gave me a copy of The Floor on the Palace, because he says you did a heck of a job covering this. He brought me up to his office and gave it to me, and I proudly have that on my home as well. So the Bad Boys era was a great time there in auto racing, and I'm just glad that we had a chance to address both the Pistons and the Detroit Grand Prix, which, of course, George Eichorn will be covering. So with that said, George, anything else you want to add before we call it a night?
No, this has been a great program. Good topics tonight. Of course, like you said, the Grand Prix is a big event for Detroit coming up June 3rd, 4th, and 5th. And it's going to be just one race this year. Detroit has had a doubleheader for the last several years. And ABC is not going to televise it. I'm a little bit disappointed. It's going to be on USA instead of NBC. Is not putting it on NBC. They're putting the Detroit race on USA, but that's okay. Most people have access to USA. But that being said, it's going to be one race only on the Sunday. As you know, the previous half dozen or more years, we've had a doubleheader. We've had one on Saturday and one on Sunday. Really a strain that puts on the teams, because they just got done with those intense weeks at Indianapolis Motor Speedway, which Scott and I were, again, as you mentioned, privileged to go to. So I'm kind of glad they're not doing 2 back-to-back in Detroit, because, like I said, the teams are just exhausted after Indy, and then 5 days later, 2 days later, they got to pack up and come to Detroit. And so that could have been a decision that Roger and the board of directors for IndyCar, I have a feeling, made that let's cut that one race out in Detroit. But it'll still be great crowds, great weather, and a fun time, I'm sure.
Well, what we're going to do is we will readdress the Detroit Pistons, Mark and George, after the NBA draft. So everything we've got here, we don't know the TBD part of the number 5, but I'm glad we had a chance to dive into the Detroit Pistons draft lottery situation to kind of set the table a little bit for it. And by all means, George, looking forward to at some point talk about the Detroit Grand Prix as well. But meanwhile, Mark, any closing thoughts?
Another great show in the books, man. It's a masterpiece.
All right. Well, if you feel that way, then why don't you let everybody know how they can get a hold of Madman Mancini?
Well, if you're not listening to XM Sirius with Fred Wall and Artie Source and myself, then it comes out to the Philadelphia WWB on Thursdays. Marianne Costello, Sal Tertaglia, and myself. Mondays and Fridays, I'm doing the Pittsburgh Pirates podcast with Tarek Brock. We did it this morning. You can catch that on blogtalkradio.com/Mancini Sports. That's the Birds and the Bucks this weekend in the Berg.
Yeah, and of course, you and I have a date tomorrow out in Oakland, California. Hey, and I will reiterate, I love that Oakland show with Bruce Kessinger, and I'm glad that you guys have made me a part of that show, permanent part, because I have a boatload of fun. I don't have to produce it. All I can do is get to talk sports, and you guys are two of the finest guys to talk with. So all I got to do is just talk.
Well, George and you make me out here, man. I'm blessed to be a part of Detroit, and I can't wait to get into Florida next week.
You got it. All right, George, go ahead and let everybody know they can get a hold of you as well.
Yes, Sandg Sports 99, SANDG Sports 99 on Twitter, or you can send me an email, George Eichorn, all spelled out, at gmail.com. Also, I'm the author of a book about Detroit sports broadcasting on the air, and you can order a copy of the book through the South Florida Tribune website. And the book covers, 50, 60 plus years of sports announcers in Detroit. And even I could never forget Scott Morganroth, my dear friend, and he's featured in that book as well. So we love to get you a copy of that book for $19.99.
By all means. And on my end, www.southfloridatribune.com is the website. Email address, southfloridatribune@gmail.com. If you want to hear us, do so on iHeartRadio, as well as all your other podcast providers. You can also go ahead and subscribe to the South Florida Tribune YouTube channel. That will not break our heart one bit, because the more you get to see us, the more you get to hear us, okay? Twitter @Tribune South. So you can find us a lot of different places. And if you forget everything I just said, go to www.southfloridatribune.com. And I couldn't close out the show without giving Candy Ebling all the praise that she deserves, because Candy Ebling does a marvelous job, not only putting the website together, but what she does with the broadcast, to me, is unbelievable. So without Candy, our jobs would be a whole lot more difficult. We are eternally grateful for what she does. But meanwhile, I enjoy working with you, Mark. I enjoy more and more on every show. And George, well, what can I say? You and I have been doing it forever. So yeah, whatever I tell you, you haven't heard it before 9 million times over. So with that said, folks, this is Fire Up Michigan. My name is Scott Morganroth, Motor City Madmouth. Please be joined by Madman Mancini and George Eichorn, the man without a nickname, but the man with a name, and a very good one, I might add. Okay. But we'll find one, or maybe we won't. Maybe you're just better off GE, George Eichorn. We bring good things to life, General Electric. I don't think I'm going to go ahead and get nailed for any. Never mind. Leave it alone, folks. But meanwhile, thanks for joining us on this edition of Fire Up Michigan. And again, Fire Up Florida is next week. And we have a lot of ambitious plans for Fire Up Michigan and Fire Up Florida. So stay with us. We have a lot of good things coming your way. Good night, everybody, and have a wonderful weekend. Thanks again for joining us.
Good night.
Good night.